Joining us now to discuss the Make America Healthy Again movement is Nathan Worcester, national political reporter at the Epoch Times. Good afternoon, Nathan. President Trump will give remarks on making health technology great again this afternoon. He could talk about a push to improve Americans' access to their own medical records. Maybe to start off, we can get your thoughts on that. How does this fit into the Maha agenda?
Well, it's very interesting to see how elements of the Maha agenda have been furthered, or you could say progress has been made on them over the past few months, whereas others have not seen that same sort of progress. And we can get into that in a few minutes. But for example, moves by Robert F. Kennedy Jr., the Secretary of Health and Human Services, on artificial food and on certain chemicals, certain things such as thimerosal in vaccines. We've seen momentum on that. I think what you're describing now is in line with some of the push for general price transparency in the medical sector that has been a bit of a mainstay, I would say, especially from the GOP, but from a lot of lawmakers in Washington. On the other hand, and we'll talk about this in a moment, it has been more difficult for the push that came before the election, the push to actually outlaw pharmaceutical ads from television to bear any sort of direct fruit.
All right, then let's go into it. Tell us in more detail with specifics, what role has the Maha agenda played in shaping recent health policy?
Sure. So I think when we look at everything, those artificial food moves by the Department of Health and Human Services, to, I would say, some of the moves that we've seen from the Congress. Specifically, I have in mind here a bill that would end pharmaceutical advertising entirely. This would include not just television, but also social media. This, though, is not coming from the administration or from its allies. It's coming from two independent senators who caucus with Democrats, Angus King of Maine and Bernie Sanders of Vermont. And they have some Democrats as co-sponsors, but it's in line with what Robert F. Kennedy Jr. was speaking about before Election Day when he was campaigning with Trump. On the other hand, we've seen moderation, sort of pumping of the brakes from Kennedy and from Dr. Marty Makary of the FDA. And I think that has a lot to do with relevant Supreme Court precedents regarding the commercial speech of drug companies. This has been something that the court has ruled on or ruled in relation to multiple times, and they've generally erred on the side of saying that marketing and advertising efforts by drug companies fall within their First Amendment rights.
So I'll just piggyback off of what you said when you mentioned those lawmakers. In your report on the Epoch Times, you said that lawmakers from both sides of the aisle view pharmaceutical advertising as a priority. So talk to us about that. Why is this happening?
Well, it's interesting to consider that, yes, you have lawmakers from both sides of the aisle, but you have somewhat different strategies coming from different camps. So Josh Hawley, a Republican who has carved out a bit of a reputation as an economic populist, he and Jeanne Shaheen, a Democrat from New Hampshire, they're leading the charge on a different bill. This one wouldn't outlaw pharma ads altogether. However, it would eliminate tax deductions that pharma companies can claim for advertising. Now, it's also interesting to note that this resembles something that was in Hillary Clinton's 2016 campaign, and also is similar to or nearly identical to a bill that Shaheen herself introduced in 2021 that ultimately died in committee. You've seen a similar bill, the House version, advanced by both Democrats and Republicans, including Nick Begich of Alaska and Angie Craig of Minnesota. But when I asked Hawley specifically about the Sanders-King bill, the more ambitious one that, again, seems like it would probably be shot down by the courts, he said that he hadn't read it, but it sounded very complimentary to his own efforts. So I think one of the takeaways here is that Democrats appear to be kind of pushing the envelope on this, despite the fact that it could, in fact, run afoul of the courts. And you have someone like Josh Hawley, for example, I think, expressing real interest in it, even as Kennedy, Makary, they are sounding more speaking about something more in line with what Hawley has proposed on pharma advertising tax deductions, or maybe just providing more information for people when they actually see some of these drug ads.
So why would you say lawmakers are pushing the envelope, as you mentioned earlier? Why do they see this as a good time to challenge pharmaceutical marketing?
Well, I think there's a variety of reasons. I think for someone looking at this from the Republican side or the right generally, there's been a great deal of skepticism of big pharma that really took off, I think, during COVID-19 and some of the response that people had to a lot of the push for vaccine use and just generally the experience people had of the public health establishment. And then on the left, from Democrats, there has been a very long-standing critique of pharma advertising. Critics on that side will often point out that only the United States and New Zealand allow pharma ads of this sort. Everywhere else in the world, they are restricted. So from that perspective, it has been and it has remained a major issue. But I think we're seeing more of a push now because with Robert F. Kennedy Jr. as health secretary, it would seem as though the administration and Republicans are on the hook to deliver on this issue that was, again, emphasized on the campaign trail ahead of President Trump's election in November.
So also in your Epoch Times article, you raised the Maha Commission's report. Can you get into a bit of the specifics there regarding pharmaceutical ads and what was in that report?
Well, so for context, the Maha Commission report, that was really focused on chronic diseases in children. But even in that context, they highlighted what they described as some of the risks of these pharma ads. The idea here, and this is something there's been a lot of research on, is that when people see a drug being advertised on TV, they might be more likely to believe, well, this is something I should get, even if there may be a cheaper generic alternative, or they don't actually have the disease for which the drug should be prescribed. And according to at least some research, could also account for some of the surge in diagnoses and in treatment for ADHD and other conditions that often show up in children or are at least diagnosed in children.
So talk to us about the volume of medications consumed by Americans and how is this used to justify the push for reform?
Well, the United States' healthcare system is, I would say, famous or perhaps notorious for a very high level of consumption of medication, very high costs. And yet, at least according to some measures of outcomes, things like life expectancy, things like, I would say, the general health of the American people in many respects, everything from that chronic disease burden that Kennedy has highlighted to I would say, the quality of the food that people are consuming. You see a big gap there between how much Americans are consuming in terms of things that, at least in theory, should make them healthy, and then how Americans are doing. And I think that's a big reason why there's this Maha push. A lot of people, I think, on both sides of the aisle feel that something is not right when it comes to the American healthcare system.
Okay, just finally, what are some other issues beyond pharmaceutical advertising that's part of the Maha agenda?
Well, it extends to many things. I think one particular area of interest where I'd be myself interested to see what happens is a push for more rigorous physical education standards or something similar to the push that we saw under JFK's presidency and under some other presidents, really a focus on ensuring that Americans' children are healthy. If there could be more specific outcomes coming from things like the Maha Commission report, and then being implemented on a large scale or perhaps even in the form of pilot projects, I think that would be worth looking out for, something certainly that in terms of making America healthy again could reap some pretty big results because, well, children, I think, are more adaptable when it comes to developing those good habits than many adults are.
Well, okay, Nathan, it's great to talk to you. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Now over to